introduce Tracy Dodds as our speaker today. Tracy is a member of the Indiana Sportswriters and Sportscasters Hall of Fame. She grew up in Lafayette. She's a Jeff grad and an IU journalism grad. And her job, which concluded a full-time job in 2006, was with the Indianapolis Star as a sports writer. And her topic today is No Women or Girls in the Press Box. Tracy Dodds.
Thank you. I don't know. Hook that to me. I will hook that to me. I'm very happy to be here. You certainly do sound like a lot of interesting people.
Yeah.
A little more that let you know that I really am of the community. My father, Bill Dodds, used to sell advertising for Lafayette Journal and Courier for his entire life. And my mother was the PR director for St. Elizabeth Hospital. So we've been around doing all these things for a long, long time. Now what happened with me, however, was I went off to Indiana University, and what I'm going to talk about, there we go, no women or children in the press box. That's how they felt about women in those days. When I grew up, probably when most of you grew up, there were no girls' high school sports, and there was no Stephanie White. It just wasn't happening. So when I got to IU, I thought, well, at least for a little while, I could write for the Indiana Daily Student, be a little bit a part of sports in that way, and always assumed that when I finally did get my degree in journalism, I'd probably be covering the courthouse or the mayor's office or something. But it all worked out really well for me. So the reason for this title is that my very first press pass to go to a Big Ten football game was to cover an Indiana game in Bloomington, and that is what it said on my press pass. So I was rather in a panic. And they were like, oh, no, that doesn't count for you, because we have like people up there serving food and women typing stats and stuff. So yeah, there are women up there, just not any sports writers. But it worked out. I went there, I did that, and also at the same time, this all leads into how in the heck did all this happen. Bob Hamill, who I'm sure you just all love him because he writes all the Bob Knight books, he was the sports editor at the Bloomington paper. So he liked my swimming coverage, which I don't have time to go into that whole thing, but those were in the Mark Spitz days. Explains how I got to the 84, 88, 92 Olympics. But he liked my swimming coverage. He had me then writing for his newspaper when he couldn't be at swimming. I was doing that. And then he gave me Martinsville High School as a beat, which in the overall scheme of things isn't huge, but it led to my being able to get my first job. So we're going to go right now to, if I did do this right, I don't know if I'm going to do this right. First one is a bottom one, go ahead. Yes, Birch Bayh. Now why am I talking about Birch Bayh? 1972, Title IX changed the world for women all around. It is, people really don't understand how many things changed after Title IX. In the newspaper business, they saw that, oh no, we're going to have to cover girls' high school sports and girls and women's in colleges, and oh my God, they might one day have pros. We better hire some women to cover that, which was ridiculous for many reasons, most of which they didn't actually start covering those sports for many years. They just weren't of enough interest. But they hired us, and most sports staffs don't have a lot of room for extra people. So you get there and you say, okay, now I'm going to be a sports writer. There I am when I first went to the Milwaukee Journal. That was my first job, the Milwaukee Journal. That thing in the foreground there is called a typewriter. The journalism classes cannot believe that I am so old that I actually wrote stories on a typewriter, but I did. That's how old I was. Even at the Milwaukee Journal, they were still using typewriters. It was amazing that I was hired there, not just because it's the only woman they'd ever had in the sports department, but I was 21 years old. And the Milwaukee Journal is a statewide newspaper, and it's a really good newspaper, and the entire newsroom was in a state of shock that they had hired me. And I'm going to get to the guy that was really in a state of shock in a moment. But what had happened was the assistant managing editor went down to Bloomington looking for summer interns. So I signed up on the bulletin board that I would like to interview for a summer internship. And in the meantime, everybody was telling him how good I am, and the lady who's in charge of placement was saying her husband says my football writing is, it's just, you can't tell the difference. So when I finally got to the interview for this internship, he said, well, we just happen to have an opening in the sports department. And I said, well, this is my lucky day. And I was graduating early, December of '73, and he hired me. He hired me. So I was, of course, in a state of shock. I really didn't think it would ever happen, but it happened. Okay, where are we going here? Okay, now, I tell you, it's a little bit off, that's okay. Bill Dwyer, who is very important in my career, was the assistant sports editor. Now, in the hierarchy of a newsroom, the higher you are, the less you actually do, which I guess is true in most places. And so the assistant sports editor was the guy who did all of the scheduling, had to get everything covered. He also had to get it all read, edited, get the photos out, get the paper out. So all of the sports writers on the staff would also work the desk, which led to me being a sports editor one day. So it all works out. But when I arrived, this is the things he had to say to me. I'll hit the highlights for you. It was December 31st, 1973, and I had just been dropped off in Milwaukee by my mother. I didn't have a car, but I had a little efficiency apartment, and I reported to the Milwaukee Journal that morning, and they introduced me to Bill Dwyer. This is the assistant sports editor. He'll be your direct superior. Here you go. So I sat down with him, and he said, a mistake has been made. It's not your fault, but you never should have been hired. We have no room on this staff for dead weight. On and on. And he ends up with saying, you're just not ready for this job. Sight unseen, he knew that. And he said, I'll have you out of here in less than 6 weeks. And I said, well, it's nice to meet you too. So he started out sending me to all sorts of things, and his strategy was, and he told me that day, I'm just going to assign you as if you were Mike Gonring, who should have gotten this job. Mike was waiting for the opening. They didn't get openings very often. He goes, and that way you will demonstrate that you can't do the job. That was his strategy, anyway. The problem is I just kept doing it. So by August, I was covering the University of Wisconsin football team. Now, in those days, they had a thing they called the Skywriters Tour. It was a preseason tour where all the guys who covered Big Ten football, and they did this in every conference, they would go around and visit all the camps and write all their preseason stuff. So this is a picture of me with 28 of my fellow journalists. Can you pick me out in that picture? This was at the Michigan State stop. So 1974, that's what we were up to. Now, to let you know how amazingly strange people thought it was that I was out there doing this, this is a story that ran in Time magazine. You see the date, 1976. I'm there on the right with the big sunglasses on because I'm out at a Greater Milwaukee Open Golf Tournament. Robin Herman of the New York Times is there on the ice, and Jane Gross from another New York paper. She's at a Netscape. I'm using the media all through this so that you know I'm not making this stuff up. So this, you can go look this up, Time magazine. Have to tell you what they had to say. The writer of this article calls women writing sports perhaps the biggest breakthrough for female scribes since Jane Swissholm became the first woman reporter to invade the Congressional Press Gallery more than a century ago. Now, personally, I didn't think it was that big, but apparently this man was rather amazed. So you've got those 3 people. In total, there are 10 women mentioned in this article. So I've been at it for 3 years, and we now have 10 in the country that they could find. Okay, so they mentioned New York, Washington, Detroit, Winston-Salem, San Francisco, and of course Milwaukee. There's nobody from Dallas, nobody from Denver, nobody from LA, nothing, nobody. The article goes on to quote Blackie Sherrod, who I later knew when I was in Texas. He was the sports editor of the Dallas Times-Herald, and he said, "I wish I had one. Everybody wants a good one. What I'd give for a good one." So that's kind of how they felt about the few of us who were in the business at the time. And Jane Gross correctly said, "We'll know that we have really come of age and are being considered sports writers instead of freaks when a newspaper has more than one." So that actually happened in my time. Now, the strangest thing happened. By this time, and when is this? I gotta tell you, 1981. So I've gone from 73 to 81 at the Milwaukee Journal. And I covered Wisconsin basketball, football, hockey, and I covered boxing. I'll get back to that too. And then I covered the Milwaukee Bucks of the NBA. So that had Quinn Buckner and Kent Benson, and it was a good time. But this is Bill's goodbye column to me when I'm leaving now, 8 years later, after he told me he was going to run me off in 6 weeks. But I told you his strategy for getting rid of me. Let me tell you what this article says. The commitment was made early and correctly that this bright young woman, fresh out of Indiana University, would not be fed a regular diet of assignments of women's field hockey and little girls' gymnastics. Her work would be judged as the work of the boys, and her assignments would be made on blah, blah. So he's taking credit now for sending me off into the big world. I am on my way to the Houston Post to cover Southwest Conference, so Big Ten to Southwest Conference. Let me tell you what happens there. Right out of the box, since I'm covering the Southwest, Southwest Conference doesn't even exist anymore. That was Texas A&M, Texas Tech, Baylor, all of those. And now they're all split up in different things. But anyway, this is a column written by the columnist from the San Antonio Express News about me being on the Skywriters tour. So we're 8 years later. I'm the first one on the Skywriters tour. I've stepped back in time, and I'm starting over because it's Texas. Let me get some highlights of this article. You're going to love this one. Oh yes, almost forgot. One of our tour rookies will be washing panties and hose on this stop. That's right. For the first time in our 30-year history, the annual trek to a lady type reporter, I'm a lady type reporter, has joined the group as we journey into 8 cities, blah, blah, blah. Tracy Dodds, attractive blonde. I mean, I'm sitting there being outraged. I think, well, he could have called me ugly blonde. I'd be even madder. Also is the newest addition to the Houston Post sports staff. It is making blah, 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 blah. It gets worse. You don't even want to know how it gets worse. Of him complaining about having a room next to me because my phone's ringing all night long. Oh, my goodness. Okay, so the funniest thing happened then. So I'm in Houston. Bill Dwyer goes to the Los Angeles Times. You know Bill, you know how much he thought of me. He hired me at the LA Times. This is a story that ran in the Times in '85. That's me interviewing Bjorn Borg. Leslie Visser, looking like a very young Leslie Visser there in the middle, and several others. And in this one, the writer is saying, the pioneers have liberated many locker rooms and press boxes. We do not have time today for me to talk to you about the locker room, but I can do hours on the politics of the locker room. I went through many stages of how did we manage to talk to these guys immediately, sometimes in the locker room, without anybody seeing anybody naked. Not that they cared. Trust me when I tell you, they didn't care. The public cared, their wives cared, the front office cared. The guys didn't care, because they would give them robes and stuff, and they would just sit on them. One time I handed Moses Malone a towel, since you know how tall I am, you know how tall he is. So I'm standing there trying to talk to him, and so I'm holding my notebook like this, and so I reached behind me on a table that in the middle of the locker room, towels, handed him a towel. Thought he might want to put it on, and he wiped his face off and hung it around his neck and continued to talk to me. So trust me when I tell you, they didn't care. But anyway, all through my career, it was all about the locker room. Now, when I would go to the Indy 500, I was not allowed in Gasoline Alley, and nobody was naked in there. So it was truly just territorial. It was always what they used for saying women can't cover this because they can't go in the locker room. Many stories on that you might well imagine. Okay, where am I? Where am I? Now we're in LA. Okay, this is still in LA. USA Today did this story. That's me on the Rose Bowl field. That's UCLA practicing behind me. I was at the Rose Bowl all the time because that was their home field. And so I covered UCLA, so I was always there. But this is saying that women have gained equal footing because they've counted up all the locker rooms we're now allowed into. And it's like, not getting it. They're not getting it at all. So finally, after being alone all that time, in '83 there were now 3 women on the LA Times sports desk, which I took as a personal compliment because it's like, she's doing it, and then they hired Julie, and then they hired Lisa, and it's like, yeah, we're all doing it. So we're just being sports writers. Here's what happens in 1988. The Association for Women in Sports Media. So there I am with about 50 of my colleagues, and that was amazing for us to get this done. So I've been in the business for 15 years. That's how many more women's sports. That's me on the second row there looking the wrong direction. I don't know why, but that's what I'm doing. Christine Brennan is standing behind me, the tall one. She's still at USA Today as a columnist. At this organizational convention in Oakland, it was on Memorial Day weekend because we all had to go on our own time and our own money. And we got the greatest rate at this Hilton in Oakland, California, because it was so ridden with prostitution and drugs that none of the major league teams would use it anymore. So they gave us a great rate, and we all went on Memorial Day weekend, and we had a wonderful time. Well, I won't go into that, but that was a good time. There are women and children in this picture. It's hard to see. It's kind of blurry. Christine was elected president. I was elected vice president because the vice president had to put out the newsletter, and my buddies at the LA Times were willing to let me do it on their dime, so that's why I was the vice president. But this was my first newsletter. Okay, where are we now? This is '88. This is the Lafayette Press Club publication, and with me trying desperately to tell people that no, we have not gained equal footing. We have a long, long way to go. And any time I got a chance to do that, I did that. In the year 2000, I don't think I have that article up here. I might. No, I don't. In the year 2000, when I was associate sports editor at Cleveland, I wrote for the American News Editors magazine to get beyond sports there a little bit about what we're still up against, and led with sitting there on a Sunday night trying to get out the Monday morning paper, and there's Andy Rooney with highlights of jobs women shouldn't do. And there's my good friend and my employee, Mary Rose Schmidt, in the Cleveland Cavaliers locker room. So it's like, yeah, we weren't getting very many places very, very fast at all. Okay, so I'm going to go a different place now. That's the big picture on how I got into it, how it all came about, and now I'm going to take a minute to say, in the world of sports writing, make sure I'm still okay, it's like he who dies with the best stories, and I don't mean the kind you write, but just the kind you tell, like Moses Malone. That's who wins. He who has the most stories when you die, you're the winner. So it was always all about who are you covering. And I'm going to take you now to my favorite quote about who are you covering. Everywhere Muhammad Ali went, he had this kind of a throng of reporters. So one of my highlight days, it was 1978, so I'm at the Milwaukee Journal, and Bill Dwyer sends me to New Orleans to cover Ali trying to regain his title from Leon Spinks. Well, you always try to avoid this. You always want something a little more personal. So on this particular day, we're like 3 days from the fight, but you still have to write every day, whether you have anything to say or not. And I'm standing in the hotel lobby looking around for any sort of an announcement, looking for the PR guys to say, are you having a press conference? Is Ali going to be available? What's happening today? Is anything happening today? And Dave Anderson from the New York Times, a wonderful, wonderful gentleman, loved him. He was always very nice to me. I helped him a little bit at the Indy 500 about stuff I knew, and any place else I saw him, he helped me. So on this particular day, he says, just stand here, just, you know. I go, well, what are we doing? He goes, well, Angelo Dundee, Ali's manager, Angie says he might be able to get us up with Ali for a few minutes in his suite. Just a few of us. He said he'd come and get us. If he can, just stick by me. Well, I stuck like glue. I wasn't. I'm right here till sundown. It ended up, the elevator doors opened. Angie went, and all of a sudden, I mean, I don't know where they came from, but there were like 8 of us in the elevator. I didn't know there were 8 of us, but there were about 8 of us in the elevator. And up we went to Ali's suite. And he's just sitting there relaxing, chilling, just got kids running around and stuff. And so everybody went in this big living room and took a seat, but we ran out of seats, so I sat on the ottoman in front of him. You know, I just, put myself there. And he held court. And you know, he was an interesting man. Whatever you think of his politics or his religion, he was an interesting man and very smart. And he gave us enough for like 8 stories. But we're not any of us leaving. We're just taking notes frantically. And at one juncture, I love this part, at one juncture he sees this columnist from the New York Daily News that he didn't like. Dick, I can't think of his last name. Why do you do me the way you do? I've been so good to you. And we're all like, oh, now he's really mad at this guy. He's ranting because apparently this guy wrote about him having his girlfriend in the Philippines. And this is when he was just married the Muslim wife that he was told to marry. So he was in big trouble over with this guy, right? But his point was, I made you who you are. I've taken you to Tokyo and Africa and Germany and the Philippines. And you do this to me. Do you think they read your column because of you? No, they read your column because of me. I'm the only reason you got to read it. I made all of y'all. And then he motions bigger. All of y'all, which I learned when I was living in Texas, that's the plural of y'all. Yeah. 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 All of y'all. You bask in reflected glory. And all the guys are going, yeah, right. You know what? We do. We do bask in reflected glory. It's the value of your story is how big is the event or how big are these stars? You know, what did you get to go and do? So I'm going to flip through some of these here. Oh my goodness, I almost forgot. Later that same day, we're still in New Orleans, 1978. So we've all got all this great Ali stuff, but, officially, for a few more days anyway, Spinks is the champion. So we got to find something Spinks. And we ask all around. I mean, if somebody finds out, okay, he's sparring across town in this old theater. So we all jump into cabs, same group, and we get to this once grand theater, and it is in shambles in a horrible neighborhood. And they've got this music piped in. I remember Boogie Yoogie Yoogie Get Down Boogie. And the place is packed with fans, and they're dancing in the aisles. And down in front, they have set up a boxing ring. Well, Spinks isn't in it. And so we go down there, and Ed, oh gosh, I forget Ed's last name, who was the boxing writer for the Associated Press, and he knew everything about everything. He's been standing down there for a while. So we all go down there, well, is he coming out or not? Well, he's thinking about it. He's not sure. And well, we got to have something. He goes, hey, interview the guy in the ring. He's a hoot. So I'm like, well, who is it? And it's this big, hulking black guy with a bald head just shining. And he's wearing sunglasses and a 3-piece suit. And he's looking out at the crowd with his back to the ring. So he goes, yeah, go talk to him. Just messing with. They always mess with me. I don't care. So I climb up the steps into the ring and I say, excuse me, what is it that you're doing here? He says, well, I'm security. I'm Spinks's bodyguard. And I said, well, since when does a heavyweight champion need a bodyguard? Do you have a lot of crowd control problems? And he's going on about it, and I'm like, this is crazy. So I said, well, how did you get this gig? Were you a boxer yourself? He said, no, I played football for the Green Bay Packers. Well, I'm Milwaukee Journal. we cover the Packers like a home team. I've got a local angle. And so this was before cell phones. I tell this story, why'd you go running for a phone? I went running to find a phone so I could call the Packers and say, tell me about this guy. And he has told me his name is Lawrence Thoreau Tiro. And I'm like, Thoreau, like Henry David? And he's looking at me. I said, how do you spell it? And so I'm getting this name, and I'm having trouble with it. So I go running off to find out what I can from the Packers about this guy. And they say they've never heard of him. And I'm like, wow, this is not good. So I go back out, and I say to my friend Ed, whose name I can't remember, they said, don't say he played for the Packers. They say he did not. And he said, maybe he had an injury or something. So I go up, and I say, he goes, okay, I got to go to my, he says, you can call me Mr. T. So I called him Mr. T, and I tried to ask him about this, and now he's not talking about the Green Bay Packers at all. He's telling me all about being a bodyguard in Chicago, and I don't know what all. So I go back down, and I say to Ed, I said, I don't know, I'd like to write this story, but I don't think I want to, call him a liar. He goes, oh, I wouldn't if I were you. He goes, if you cross Mr. T, he'll dot both your I's. So at that, I thought, I got to write the story because I got to use that line. And I did credit Ed, and I'm sure I knew his last name then, with cross Mr. T and he'll dot both your I's. But that's just one day. I mean, you have days like this as a sports writer. It was the best job ever in the history of the world. So why am I not doing it now? The newspaper business has changed, and okay, we're going to skip forward here. Skipping forward. When I was at UCLA, I covered this kid. He grew up to be Reggie Miller.
Okay.
And I'll tell you I'm going back. Can I go back? How smart I am. I actually, when he was a junior, said he is going to be a star. How about that? Aren't I smart? And then I covered this guy for football, number 8. What is with me here? He grew up to be Troy Aikman, Hall of Fame quarterback. And sure enough, in this article, sooner or later, so that's a play on the fact he had transferred from Oklahoma, sooner or later, Troy Aikman is going to find greatness as a passer. So, I mean, gosh, what did it take for me to figure those things out? I covered UCLA until August 8th, 1988. On 8/8/88, we learned of the trade of Gretzky to the Kings. So they put me on the Kings, and I proceeded to have a wonderful couple of years on hockey. Love it. Greatest guys ever. Great game. Calgary's not so great in the winter, but it was a good time. I had to go to Seoul for the Olympics then. I covered swimming and diving at 3 Olympic Games. And in '88 in Seoul, Luganis was everything, and I loved Luganis. And the day I got back from the Olympics in Seoul, I covered my first NHL game, Gretzky's opener in LA. No pressure there. Oh yes, I did. Opening minds harder than opening doors. This is the one where I talk about the Rooney piece. And there I am with my friend Bob Hamill at a game. And there's my Hall of Fame thingy. Bob Hamill is the one who got me in the Hall of Fame. And they were supposed to induct another woman this year, and they did not. So I'm still the only one also. And the significance of this, working press only, that's what all of the press passes now say. They no longer say no women or children in the press pass. So that is my little presentation. And I'll take questions if you have any.
Now we got time for a couple. She covered a lot there, didn't she?
Oh, I left a lot out.
Oh, I'm positive.
I left a lot out.
You've met a pretty significant person today you never really knew. Now you
Nobody
do.
knew.
Yes.
You never mentioned track. Did you ever follow track?
Yeah. When I was in Houston, right after I had the car wreck that wrecked my foot terribly and I was on crutches, I was trying to cover Carl Lewis, who kept running across the field, and I'm like, wait, Carl, don't try to chase Carl Lewis when you're on crutches. So as a part of covering the Southwest Conference, I did cover track there. I did not, that's a big Olympic deal, you know, so every 4 years, huge. Otherwise, it was like whatever college I was covering. In Texas, they feel this, well, in Texas, you know, there are two sports, football and spring football. They call basketball thump thump. So I can't begin to tell you how they feel about track. So one day I had to go cover the Southwest Conference meet. It was at the University of Texas. So I go up in the elevator to the press box, and I get off the floor there, and the SID, the Sports Information Director, is standing there to direct me. He said, this way if you're a serious track rider, this way if you're not a serious track rider. And I'm like, well, I'm here to write a story. I'm here to get it right. I guess I'm a serious track rider. He goes, well, let me rephrase that. Did you bring your own stopwatch? I said, no. He goes, then you belong in the press box where the beer is. I said, okay. I went that way. So that's about how much of track I covered.
One more question. A lady, please.
Aside from the time you spend interviewing and doing research, how long might it take you to actually construct a story?
Well, let me put it this way. A Kings game at the Forum began at 7:30 and ended about 10:30, and my deadline was 10:45. So what I would do is interview in the afternoon at the skate around and know what the issues are, because I cover this team every day and travel with them and everything. So I'd have some ideas about what this story might be. And then I would write as the game is going on, like after the first period, scoreless, blah, blah, blah. And you've got all the background of who's injured and what we're looking for and all that stuff. Second period, down at the bottom. And then you write the third period at the top, and it's like, and with so many minutes to play. And that's how fast you put it together. Then for the next edition, which is at 11:30, and we're talking LA Times with 1.3 million readers. So that crappy throwaway story that I would write during the game would go to like 250,000 people. So it's like you really did try to do a decent job on even that story. But then you go downstairs, see if there are any issues, because sometimes there are issues that you don't even know about, you know, and they're all talking about it. And that's when the locker room was an issue. And, you know, they were sometimes coming out and sometimes were going in and whatever. And then get some quotes and get a new angle. By that time, they've got all the stats to you and everything, and you go back up and you rewrite. Have about 30 minutes for the rewrite. So that's how long.
Hey. I enjoy sports, as you might guess, and my wife's the one that's told me about hearing Tracy a couple of times, and I thought, gosh, I've got to introduce her to my Kiwanis club. My wife's a Rotarian, and I've told you before, we're ecumenical in our service clubs. And but our program next week, my last one, is The Real Wes Love. Wes has been one of the most significant friends that I've had in Kiwanis in these years we've been together. And I sort of knew there was something besides him running 200 marathons. I thought there was something more. And I sort of phoned Jim one day, and he said, gosh, I sat across from Wes Love the other day at a Kiwanis meeting, and he's really interesting from his boyhood growing up and all he's done. And Camilla tried to get him for one of those 2-3-minute jobs, you know, introducing Wes Love, and he said I couldn't do it in 30 minutes. Well, I said, if you'd pare that down just a little bit, so my program next week is The Real Wes Love by Wes himself.